All right. Hey, good morning, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Saturday, June 29th, 2024. This is your morning tropical update on what is now Tropical Storm and soon to be Hurricane Beryl in the central Atlantic basin. Since we last talked, I don't know, 16 hours ago, Beryl has rapidly intensified throughout the night and this morning and is now closing in on the Windward Islands as a major hurricane potentially on Monday. So a lot of things have, some things at least have changed since we last talked. So we are monitoring the progress of Beryl today. That'll be the most of the video. But unfortunately, we have to follow along with what's coming behind Beryl, which is another tropical wave following close behind that may also develop and also impact the Windward Islands. And if that's not enough, we are also tracking Invest 94L along Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. This is going to move into the southwest Gulf of Mexico and may impact Mexico's Gulf Coast. So we're not really going to talk about 94L because it's not really going to impact the U.S. much. It could get a name, and the hurricane hunters are going to check that out tomorrow and maybe tomorrow night. But as it stands right now, no major U.S. impacts besides maybe some rain for South Texas. So most of today's video will be on Beryl and then a little bit on what's following Beryl. So National Hurricane Center's 11 a.m. advisory is out. Maximum sustained winds 65 miles an hour. So I just want to stress, Beryl was a 35 mile an hour tropical depression at 5 p.m. yesterday. It is at 11 a.m. today, 65 mile an hour tropical storm. That is absolutely rapid intensification criteria. And that movement's to the west at 23 miles an hour. We are anticipating a bit more of a north of west track as we go into Sunday and early on Monday. But as you see here from the Hurricane Center, they absolutely expect this to impact parts of the Southern Windward Islands now as a major hurricane. Yesterday, a Category 2 was forecast. Now they are explicitly forecasting a Category 3 hurricane to impact parts of the Windward Islands on Monday. We can look at the tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings. Hurricane watches are in effect for Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadine Islands, Grenada. And we're also looking at potential impacts for Martinique and Tobago as well. So we look at the current forecast, again, 115 miles an hour from the Hurricane Center, and then eventually does show a bit less of a bit more of a downturn as we go into the Caribbean as we work into next week. But we will talk about why in a minute. Let's go ahead and look at the satellite presentation first, and Beryl looks quite good this morning. A small tropical cyclone, not a very big one, but a no doubt very healthy tropical cyclone. We see multiple bands converging inward. We have that expanding cirrus canopy, that central dense overcast, as we call it. And although the visible satellite presentation doesn't show this, I have seen some microwave imagery this morning that shows Beryl is making an eye wall. And that structural process is ongoing under this canopy of high clouds that we can't see, but there's likely at least a partial eye wall forming with Beryl this morning. And if the storm is able to complete that process, that will pave the way for more rapid intensification tonight and early tomorrow. So the processes are quickly coming together, and this has the look of a storm doing just that. And Beryl has three things really going for it. Number one, that the environment is overall pretty good. There's a little bit of dry air to the north, but this dry air is kind of highlighted by these low clouds moving right to left across your screen. They're not really being pushed down into the storm. They're just kind of draped over it. And that's not really enough to put any significant pressure on the storm. So with that in mind, all that dry air and a little bit of shear up there is lurking to the north, but it's not really getting down to the storm. The only thing the storm has to deal with is a bit of easterly shear. We can see the cirrus clouds expand further to the west here, but they don't expand very far to the east, indicating there is some mid to upper shear pushing on the storm, but it does not appear to be significantly hindering Beryl. And the third thing that really is getting going for it is this tropical upper trough to Beryl's north. We see here a area of low pressure kind of rotating, or upper trough rotating here. And look at this channel of moisture moving away from Beryl. There's something I want to point out here. So you see these clouds streaming away from the southwest and the northeast. This channel is upper level winds that are pulling air away from Beryl. This is what we call, basically creates divergence aloft in the atmosphere. And all this really means is air is being moved away from the top of the storm, which means more air can then rise to take its place, and that promotes upward vertical motion. And when you have more of a catalyst for thunderstorm development. More thunderstorm development, pressures begin to fall, falling pressure, stronger storm. So that all kind of links together. And we know from research now and from observations that when we have these troughs positioned in this way where it's not directly over the storm, because again, notice how that plume right here on the RGB false color on Tropical Tidbits is pulling that air away, but it's over here. It's not directly on top of the storm. So when it's not on top of the storm, it's able to ventilate it without actively harming it. I've used this analogy before in other storms, and basically it's like if you ever are trying to like make a campfire and you blow on it just a little bit, just right, it kind of gets going. But if you blow on it too much, it just goes out. That's kind of what this kind of upper shear can do. If it's right over the storm, it may just extinguish the storm, but it's nearby enough to promote that enhancement of the thunderstorm activity, but not be so close to actively harm it. So all those things are basically on top of each other. And then, of course, you have water temperatures almost 2 months ahead of schedule. And we talked about this. We said, this season had the potential to do this. Beryl is the furthest east forming tropical storm as far as intensity goes on record. It's one of the only storms that'll ever be a hurricane out here on record in June. And it's the only storm we've ever seen to undergo rapid intensification this part of the air of the Atlantic in the month of June. I mean, this is unprecedented territory in multiple ways, and this is what we thought this season could do for us, and that's what it's doing right now. So look at a couple intensity models real quick. HWRF does bring this in. Now that we have an organized storm, we can get a little more credibility with these systems. The HWRF verified very well. It was at 998. That's what the Hurricane Center estimates the pressure at. And you can see this pressure just steadily falls here. Moisture stays nice and tight. The cyclone stays fairly well structured and compact and stacked vertically. And this just moves right in to St. Vincent as a 961 millibar, probably category 2 or 3 hurricane on the HWRF. Very robust storm. And again, if this were to happen, we would be talking about hurricane impacts for some of these islands, but then this would be tropical storm for others. Again, compact storm, but big impacts where it does hit. GFS, curiously enough, is following suit. The HWRF does pull from the GFS, so it's not completely impossible that they're in lockstep. But GFS is also very aggressive, pulling this down to the mid-960s as well. 961 on the HWRF, 964 on the GFS as this passes through the Windward Islands, again leading credence to that Hurricane Center forecast that we are dealing with the propensity of a Category 3 hurricane moving through on Monday. And folks there need to be prepared, and you need to be done by tomorrow night because this is going to be coming in early on Monday to come. So where does Beryl go from here? Well, looking at the Super Ensemble again on Tomer Berg's website, we do see the new Super Ensemble again carries this towards the Western Caribbean by the end of the forecast period. I can say with fair amount of confidence at this point that Florida and the Carolinas, you guys in Georgia, you guys are probably good. I don't think there's any world where this is going to get out of the Caribbean and get plucked up and out of here. And even if it did, you have Puerto Rico and Hispaniola and even some of eastern Cuba that has enough mountains on it to disrupt the storm significantly. And I think that most signs point to this staying south of there, although it's going to be a close call for Haiti and some of the southern part of the Dominican Republic and especially Cuba. Jamaica's right in the crosshairs. And a couple other islands down there as well, all could be directly impacted as this moves along. But the question is really going to be towards the end of the forecast period here is where does Beryl wind up? Does it wind up near the tip of western Cuba? Does it wind up closer to Central America? Does it wind up maybe more towards the Yucatan? Because there's a wide range of possibilities. But the basic track theory is this. You have a big high over the Central Atlantic, the Bermuda-Azores high pushing this along right now. You're going to have a high moving slowly across the southeast U.S. as we get through the July 4th start of the week. So again, by the end of this forecast where you see the blue circle below here, that's towards the that's next Saturday. So when we're talking about July 4th, the storm's going to be somewhere right in here. So it feels a little bit of a weakness between these highs. So it lifts northward, but then it doesn't lift enough, and then it gets pushed back to the west. But the exact trajectory and how that looks is what we're asking and what we're trying to figure out. And again, where this winds up has a lot of potential follow-ons. If this winds up into Central America, it will just bury itself in Central America and it'll be no more. If it gets into the Yucatan, it can cross the Yucatan and it'll be disrupted, but the Yucatan Peninsula will not wipe out a hurricane. It will stumble moving across land, but it will not wipe it out. And then you could see some potential impacts towards, Texas or Mexico. And then if this comes into that kind of danger zone right there between the Yucatan and Western Cuba, Then especially the central Gulf Coast from Pensacola, probably to Houston, have to be watching this closely because as that high slides offshore going into later into the July 4th weekend, you might catch a weakness enough for Beryl to turn more into that. And if it's still a well-organized hurricane, it could take advantage of the Gulf of Mexico, which is also running above average in terms of water temperature. For whatever it's worth, the other models here on Topical Tidbits, just some different suites of models showing the same sort of thing, high confidence that this probably is just south of Cuba towards the end of next week, and then from there a lot of question marks. Intensity guidance all pretty much uniformly peaks this around category 3 with a few exceptions, and then they all do bring it back down as it gets into the Caribbean. So that follows along with a Hurricane Center track that says, you know, this goes up and then it peaks about category 3, makes landfall in the Windward Islands, and then begins to weaken a little bit. That's due to some pretty healthy easterly shear and some drier air that should be in the Eastern Caribbean around the start of next week. So we do believe it'll weaken some, but notice even at the end of the Hurricane Center's official forecast, it is still a 90-mile-an-hour hurricane. So, you know, if the storm stays organized, it's not going to take much for it to bounce back. So I want to leave us with one more thought here because we have to also talk about what is following Beryl for a moment. We have another tropical wave in the Atlantic Basin that is moving along, and similar to Beryl, has the same opportunity to intensify as Beryl did because this area of the Atlantic is going to remain fairly conductive for development. National Hurricane Center gives this wave up to a 60% shot to develop in the next 7 days. And I want to show you the GFS if I have it here. Okay, so we're going to go back to the GFS, mean sea level pressure here on Tropical Tidbits. So again, we have teleported ourselves back to early Monday. Beryl is making landfall as a major hurricane in the Windward Islands, but watch what happens. You already have another wave developing behind Beryl. And then as I go through the later part of the week, the other wave quickly approaches. And by Wednesday, you may have another tropical storm or, you know, potentially a hurricane bearing down once again on basically the same islands. And I mean, this may be to the effect the Hurricane Center may not even drop these watches. They may put up warnings and then they may go right back to watches because the next storm will already be on the doorstep. So if you're in the Windward Islands, when Beryl comes by, you might want to keep a close eye on the forecast because you may have another one knocking on your door. And again, this is something we see sometimes in August or September when everything is at peak. Seeing this in June is just, it's insanity. But, you know, we knew that this season could deliver something like this, and it is, after what was a slow start, it is absolutely starting to live up to the hype. So we're going to keep a close eye on this. Again, right now in the eastern U.S., it is too early to make any definitive calls. I would not say that anyone needs to be panicking or running for the hills. I think if you're on the East Coast, North Carolina to Florida, and of course New England and all that, you guys are all pretty much going to be okay on this one. But if I was on the central Gulf Coast or western Gulf Coast, I would be closely watching. And then, of course, all the islands, Mexico, Central America, all need to keep a close eye on it as well. But again, it is going to be a few more days before this gets into the Caribbean and we know any more about where exactly it may want to wind up. So that's what I got for you guys today on your Tropical Update. As always, thanks for watching and have a good one.